If you remember back to the acid test, one of the things that we discussed is the fact that our transactions must be isolated, which again just simply means that if my transaction is running and somebody else comes along and they're trying to work with data that I'm currently working with, they're not allowed to touch that. The way that SQL implements this is through concurrency and eventually, as we're going to see, by utilizing locks. We just mentioned concurrency is the process of managing who has access to data. The way that access to data is going to be managed is through locks, and locks, as we're going to see, come in many different varieties. The first type of lock that we have is what's known as a shared lock, sometimes known as a read lock. A shared or read lock is going to be obtained anytime that I select data. Now, the thing about a shared lock is that a shared lock can be shared with other people who are trying to read that data. Contrast that with what's known as an exclusive lock, or sometimes known as a write lock. The whole thing about an exclusive lock is this is going to be used whenever I go to modify data. Whenever I'm modifying data, we need to make sure nobody else is working with that, reading that, trying to modify that. So you'll notice that an exclusive lock, as the name implies, is going to prevent other users from accessing that data. The next type of lock that we have is what's known as an update lock. Now, the thing about an update lock is that the name is a little bit misleading, because when you see update lock, you immediately assume, oh, well, that's only for update statements. And that's actually not the case. An update lock is a hybrid lock. Now, one of the things that SQL can do is if I issue, let's say, an update or delete statement, SQL can start that operation off as a shared lock. That way other people can read the original value, and then finally, once we're ready to actually commit to the database, then we'll escalate that to an exclusive lock. Now, while it was a shared lock, nobody else was able to come along and modify that, so my data is going to be safe during the interim, during that operation. The last type of lock worth mentioning is what's known as an intent lock. And the whole goal of an intent lock is to ensure that nobody, well, basically knocks the table out from under me. For example, if I go in and I issue a select statement or an update or an insert or a delete on data inside of a table, we want to make sure that nobody drops that table or nobody drops the database that I'm currently working on. This is where an intent lock comes into play. The goal of an intent lock is to make sure that nobody else is allowed to take away that parent when I'm executing a query. I do want to mention that there are other potential types of locks, and that you'll also notice that inside of the MSDN documentation, again also sometimes known as the books online, there's a great little table that will show you all the compatibility between the different lock types. One of the things about maintaining a lock is that a lock is going to incur a little bit of overhead. That in order for SQL to lock down that little piece of data, it does take a little bit of a resource from SQL. So one of the things that SQL tries to do is find a balance of locking as little data as possible while maintaining as little amount of overhead as possible. As a result, locks can actually be maintained at a few different levels, and I've highlighted 3 right here. Row locks, which is going to be a lock at a row level, what's known as a page lock, and a page, for those of you that are not familiar, is an 8K block of data in which my rows are going to be stored. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about a page lock, or eventually a table lock, is that if you have a lock at that level, you are now not just locking the data that you're working with, you are locking all the data inside of that page, or all the data inside of that table. This is known as lock escalation, and lock escalation can be something that's going to really impact performance. A couple little best practices. You want to ensure that you're locking as little data as possible and for as short a period of time as possible.